JP Morgan expects Russia's economy to fall by 35%. Inflation has risen to 12% and Russia's budget is having a deficit despite extravagant oil prices. Russia is kicked out of the international financial system, Russia's military complex is collapsing, and the entire economy is about to implode. Russia's economy might not be in the top 10 largest economies, but it's much more powerful than many other economies out there. Up until 2014, Russia's economy was 8th largest economy and was growing at an annual rate of 4 to 5%. But then Russia decided to pursue its geopolitical interests, so it took over Crimea. The next day, the United States and the EU put sanctions on Russia and attacked its currency, pushing its GDP to plummet. Overnight, Russia's GDP lost half of its value. It went from $2.3 trillion to $1.3 trillion in the next 2 years. That's like the United States GDP falling from $23 trillion to just $13 trillion in the next 2 years. That is nothing less than a catastrophe. In less than 2 weeks, Russia went from a respected country to the most sanctioned country in the world. Almost 14,000 sanctions were imposed on Russia. Even North Koreans were like, what? The West imposed more sanctions on Russia than Iran, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela combined. The world economy is interconnected. No country can survive on its own, even the United States. Your car might be built by General Motors, but every part of it is delivered from a different country. The same thing goes to your phone, computer, clothes, the plane you take, the road you drive, and so on and so forth. So imagine for a moment that your country can no longer trade with the world. Most Russian banks are kicked out of the SWIFT system. So most businesses and companies no longer can send or receive funds from the rest of the world, except the post-Soviet countries. Imagine you have a business in Russia. What would you do when you see news such as this?
More global companies are taking a stand against Russia in response to its invasion of Ukraine.
Well, McDonald's is selling its business in Russia.
H&M is the latest.
Nike making a full exit out of Russia.
Yet another major retailer is closing up shop in Russia.
Well, Starbucks is exiting the Russian market.
Over 1,000 international companies that hired tens of thousands of Russians left the country overnight. But you can't just pack up and leave. You can't take with you factories, cars, buildings. Your only choice is to sell as much as you can, convert your rubles to dollars, and send them overseas back to your home country. Before even that becomes impossible. Everyone was selling rubles like they were mining gold, to the point where there was so much supply and so little demand that the Russian ruble lost half of its value, jumping from around 70 rubles per dollar to 144 rubles per dollar. When they saw that the value of the ruble depreciated so fast, that caused a compound effect, pushing even the average Russians to sell their rubles, pushing the ruble to lose furthermore value. But that was just the beginning. The United States restricted major chip manufacturers to sell chips to Russia. Chips are the backbone of the modern world. Everything you use is mostly built on chips. Your phone, computer, airports, cars, planes, lamps, refrigerators, microwaves, like everything, including all the weapons that the Russian military has been using to invade Ukraine. So if Russia no longer has access to chips, it can no longer produce weapons, build cars, planes, or even refrigerators. So analysts were confident that by the end of the year, the Russian economy will entirely collapse. The crisis might be even worse than the 1998 crisis. Besides the physical war that's taking place on the ground, there is a computer war going on that is not visible to us. Last year, over 800,000 people got hacked. Hackers accessed their emails, passwords, private photos, and bank accounts. Hacking someone's phone is easy. When you browse the internet using a cellular connection, any data that is being transferred gets encrypted when sent and decrypted when received by using an encryption protocol. But when you use public Wi-Fi to log into your bank account, such as in restaurants, airports, coffee shops, you're using an open network that is not encrypted. All information is sent in plain text for anyone to intercept. All someone has to do is just download a wireless network analyzer, and with some hardware and basic skills, they can view everything that you are viewing. Passwords, emails, private photos, whatever. That is why you need Surfshark VPN, which makes your internet connection encrypted and secure. The best part about it is that you can install Surfshark VPN on unlimited devices. When you get a 24-month plan, you get a 3-month extra and 83% off. Just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description and use my promo code. It has a 30-day money-back guarantee. To make the crisis worse, Russia stopped selling oil and gas to Europe, which was its main source of revenue, in an attempt to pressure the West to stop supporting Ukraine. But the problem is that the entire Russian economy is based upon selling natural resources to Europe to keep its domestic economy growing. In response, the EU set a $60 price cap for Russian oil. That was a catastrophe for the Russian economy. Russia is now facing a deficit in its budget. It is struggling to sell its oil and gas and is making minimum profits. Experts are predicting that the Russian economy is about to face a crisis as serious as the 1998 crisis. But what is the 1998 Russian financial crisis? When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia's budget had a deficit of over 20%, which the Russian government solved by printing money. You're probably guessing how that ended. However, the Russian government couldn't solve all of its problem by just printing money, so it wanted to use a more moderate approach by raising money from the public through selling government bonds. Russia was collapsing and the economy was doing absolutely horrible. The Russian government couldn't just sell its bonds. So, to attract investors, the Russian government offered a 20% interest on its bonds, which went up to 150%, which was insanely high for a government bond. The idea behind it was that the government is going to raise money by selling these bonds and then take that money and invest it in Soviet-era factories that have been used ineffectively, and turn them into efficient factories and then use the profits from these factories to pay back the investors who purchased these bonds. But none of these factories could bring that kind of profits to pay up to 150% of interest annually to investors. So what the government did instead is, it issued new government bonds to pay for its previous government bonds, and so on and so forth, to the point where it all turned into one giant pyramid scheme where the government kept raising money to pay its previous investors. When everything was about to explode, the government allowed foreign investors to get to the Russian market and sold a third of government obligations to them. The Asian financial crisis that took place in 1997 destroyed many economies. Oil prices fell from $25 per barrel to just $9 per barrel. And since oil was the main source of revenue for the Russian government found itself in a situation where it can't fill its budget and had to borrow more money to meet its obligations. But the crisis wasn't that long, because in 1999, oil prices tripled, which overfilled the Russian budget with more money than it could imagine. But on 24th of February 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, experts were confident that the current crisis will be as bad as the crisis of 1998. Almost a year has passed since the invasion. So what is the state of the Russian economy now? Is it really collapsing? Surprisingly, the Russian economy did way better than most people expected. Instead of the 35% decline in GDP, it fell only by 3%. The Russian military complex is still capable of producing sophisticated weapons, and Russian ruble bounced back to pre-war level. Russia looks in a way better shape than anyone expected. Seems like Putin and his team really prepared for such a scenario. Does that mean that thousands of Western sanctions didn't affect Russia? The answer is both yes and no. In the first 100 days of the war, Russia earned over $100 billion selling oil and gas, which filled its budget with enough money to save the economy and keep its military operations. That was a calculative move for Russia, Russia waited for this opportunity to start the invasion, but it didn't go as the way the Kremlin planned. So Russia is now stuck in a prolonged war that it can't afford. Sanctions don't immediately affect the country. Russia still had an inventory of cars, planes, chips, and foreign reserves, but as time went by, Russia's reserve began depleting. It can't fill them due to Western sanctions. Russia has already started using its rainy day fund to close its budget deficit. Russia began selling more of its foreign reserves to support the ruble and was forced to turn its economy into a wartime economy, something that Russia clearly never planned for. Russia's entire automobile industry, for example, has crumbled. It's now producing cars without seatbelts or airbags because they can't import them due to sanctions. The only way to buy a normal safe car is to import it through a third country and sell it at a higher price. It will no longer be able to produce high-tech guided missiles since it won't have access to chips any longer. Foreign investment, innovation, or business is pretty much over. Who would invest in a country that's in a state of war and can't seem to win it? So while 2022 was not catastrophic for Russia, this year things will get significantly worse. Russia's economy will start declining year after year, and in a matter of a few years, Russia will be no different than North Korea. That was the United States' main objective since the beginning of the invasion, and that's what seems to happen. Will Putin survive this war? Does Russia has a chance to win this war? Share your thoughts in the comments below.